In the middle of the Utah desert sits the remains of a town that was supposed to solve one of the biggest problems in the Old West: iron. In the 1850s, if you wanted to build cities, railroads, tools, wagons, or farms, you needed iron. And hauling that across the country was brutally expensive. So the leaders in Utah had an idea. What if they made their own? And iron doesn't grow on trees, so they decided that they would just create an iron city. And a town, it grew really, really fast, but it failed faster. And eventually it became Utah's first ghost town. The reason this town existed in the first place is it comes down to geology. Southern Utah had three things: iron ore, limestone, and timber for charcoal. Those are the key ingredients that you need to produce iron. So in 1851, Brigham Young sent settlers south to create what became known as the Iron Mission. And this wasn't just symbolic. They genuinely believed southern Utah could become an industrial center, which sounds ambitious, doesn't it? But imagine how ambitious it sounded back then if it sounds like that today. There were no railroads here, no major roads, and definitely no modern infrastructure, just an isolated desert. So, they built a town, and in the center of that town was the furnace. And this thing was rather massive. So what was the purpose of this? So workers would feed it in layers: charcoal, limestone, and then iron ore. Then air was blasted into the furnace to drive the temperatures high enough to separate the molten iron from the rock. Which sounds pretty straightforward, until you remember that they were trying to do this in the middle of the desert in the 1800s. And every piece of equipment, every tool, every supply had to come from somewhere else first. So being ambitious, the town just kind of grew. And at its peak, hundreds of people lived here: families, blacksmiths, laborers. And of course, the teamsters hauling materials across the rough terrain to fill this furnace so that they can make the ore. And life here wasn't easy. It was rather hard. Summers were brutally hot. If you've ever been to St. George, Utah, you know this area is known for being hot. And of course, the resources weren't great either. They were pretty limited. And the success of the entire town depended on the one thing: the furnace consistently working all the time. But that became a problem almost immediately. Now, when you're talking about items, quality matters, and that also matters when you're producing raw materials, including iron. It is no exception to that rule. And the problem here is the iron produced wasn't high quality. The furnace struggled. They had problems with equipment breaking all the time, and the production became very inconsistent. But with all those other issues, that wasn't actually their biggest problem. It was moving the iron once it was produced. Iron is heavy, really heavy, and every pound had to be hauled long distances by wagons across rough country. There were no railroads in this part of the country yet. So even when the production was going well, they weren't having problems, the profitability for this settlement didn't. And just as you can imagine, things got even worse. In 1873, a national financial crisis hit the United States and banks started failing, railroads were collapsing, and investment money was drying up. Suddenly, this isolated desert operation that was everyone's dream was competing against cheaper and more efficient iron producers back in the East, and they just couldn't keep up. So in 1876, the furnace was shut down. And once the furnace stopped, the reason for the town disappeared with it because they were there. Their whole name was about iron. Without the iron, there was nothing to do in this area besides maybe some ranching if you were into that. So families moved away. The buildings were abandoned and materials were scavenged, and slowly the desert started to reclaim the land. So what makes this place so much more interesting than just a normal failure, because we see towns failing all across the American West, this isn't really something that is unusual. So what makes Irontown fascinating isn't that it just failed. It was what makes this place different, because it was made on an idea that wasn't proven yet. These people, they just went out there. They weren't just trying to survive one season. They thought that they were going to make an industrial future in one of the harshest landscapes imaginable. And for a brief moment, they thought it was pretty possible. Today, most people drive right past this place without even realizing it exists. But scattered across the desert are the remains of a town that once believed it could change the future of the West. And as you visit this site, it's hard not to admire the people who had the willingness and the ability to try. Because even though Iron City failed, the fact that they built it at all and they just lived their dream was kind of incredible. We could all learn something from them.